for those of you who don't know me, my name's Natalie Ford, and I am a relationship empowerment coach. So I'm going to talk to you today about what is an empowered relationship and what are the benefits of that, and how can you achieve this? How can you reach this amazing goal for your relationship with yourself and also relationship with others? So many of us will focus on our relationships externally. You may find that you're not attracting the sort of friends that you would like to have in your life, or maybe you're not able to find the partner of your dreams. I'm going to speak a bit today about my story of empowerment and how discovering the language of empowerment and the responsibility that comes with empowerment and the gifts of empowered relating, how that has completely transformed my life. So yeah, let me start with where I've come from, just to give you some context around what an empowered relationship is not, and what an empowered relationship is, essentially, like where I've come from and where I've got to and continue to journey to. So some years back, I knew deep down I was a good person. I knew that I had a lot to offer people and friends and a partner. And yet it just wasn't really happening in life for me. I didn't really feel like the people who were in my life valued me. And I had this sort of sense that I was a bit annoying to everybody, to be honest with you. I was always a bit treading on eggshells and always feeling a bit like, oh, am I really welcome here? Do people really want me here? And with partners, I was really deeply insecure. I could get partners, but the relationships tended not to last more than about a year and a half, 2 years, because ultimately my insecurities would drive the other person away. And it was heartbreaking to witness this pattern repeating over and over, where I'd date this beautiful person, and in the beginning, all the toxins, maybe that's not quite the word I was looking for, or the endorphins is the word I was trying to find. All the endorphins are there and the relationship feels good, and there's lots of love making, and there's lots of hand holding, hugging, and going on dates. But of course, that naturally sort of subsides, at least to some degree, and you settle into a routine with somebody. And as this settling into a routine with people came about in my relationships, I started to question if they really still wanted to be with me, because I needed that high, that initial level of like really intense contact to feel secure in myself that they still wanted to be with me. So I would need them to message me like multiple times a day, and if they didn't, I'd get shitty with them. And if they like looked at another person, then I would be like, oh my God, right, that's it. They want that person. They don't want me anymore. I was very, very easily off balance. Like my sense of self-worth was really in the hands of how much availability my partner could give me. And it was incredibly volatile because of that. Because of course, another person has got their entire life, right? I'm not the center of that other person's life, even if I might want to be. But, they've got their own emotions, they've got their own stresses, they've got their own job, their own family, their own friends, their own way of approaching life. And of course, all of that will naturally come first in any person's life because it's about them. And then other people come after that. So it's really natural that, somebody might come home from work and they're grumpy because, whatever, they're still carrying the energy of their day from work. And it doesn't mean that they're grumpy with me or that they don't love me or that they're not, something's wrong in our relationship. But I would take it to mean that. I'd be like, oh my God, I've done something wrong. I've upset them. and I trace back to conversations in my head. What have I said? Or did I forget to do something? Or do they not like the way I've dressed today? Or whatever. Anyway, if you can relate to any of this, drop me a message in the comments so that, I can just see if this material is resonating for you. And with friendships, I had friends and I was always there for them. I made sure like I was the best friend in the world. I would take phone calls at 11 o'clock at night because somebody needed to talk. I would drop everything in my busy schedule to go and be with somebody because their life was falling apart. I would make sure that I was always at people's birthday gatherings and whatever gatherings were important to them, because that's how I wanted people to show up for me. However, they didn't always show up for me that way. I was giving and giving and giving, and they didn't always show up for me in that way. And the sense of betrayal was huge. The sense of, how can it be that like I've given you so much, like I dropped my entire world when you needed that thing the other week, and yet now it's my turn and you're not willing to do the same. And I kept experiencing this pattern over and over where I would give and give and give because I really wanted people to like me. I really desperately wanted people to need me and to involve me in their life. And I thought that if I made myself like super available, that they'd be like, oh, Natalie's available. Oh, Natalie can do that thing. Natalie can help me, and that they'll call upon me. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work like that. And I found out the hard way. Let me know if any of you have had like other similar experiences. I can see that the boyfriend girlfriend material I was mentioning resonates with a couple of you. Share with me if you've also got this friend thing going on, or maybe you've had it in the past and maybe you've worked through it and you're, you recognize this as part of where you've been, but it doesn't feel so relevant for you right now. So ultimately, my life became all about giving to my friends and my partner, trying to be like the best girlfriend, the best friend to everybody, the best daughter to my mum and my dad at that point. And Natalie Ford on the priority list was like somewhere down there. And I found that I would be up until all hours in the day trying to get my things done because I'd spent most of my day giving to other people. I found that I would get very little sleep and I'd be always very stressed. There would be a lot of anxiety in my body. I was always on tenterhooks. I never really knew, am I appreciated? Am I valued? Do people really want me? And of course, I could logic in my head, oh, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so did this. And I could find evidence that would show me that yes, I am valued and yes, people do think of me, but the insecurities never thought that was enough. Like the insecurities from my insides would just keep coming and keep asking. And, even if my boyfriend had said 5 minutes ago, do you love me? I'd then think, oh, does he still love me? Like literally 5 minutes later, I'd be like, I know he just said it, but like, what if he changed his mind? So, Claire and Darius, you're also recognizing you give so much that you're empty. And I became absolutely depleted. And this was actually my spiritual awakening. This was my beginning of now. I remember having everything in life, or well, everything that society says you're supposed to have, that is. I had a great job. I was living with a partner who was an amazing man. He had 2 beautiful children who loved me and thought the world of me. We had cars, we had holidays, we had good groups of friends. We'd go out every Saturday night and, we'd socialize. And on the face of it, I had a good family. I had everything that like society says you're supposed to have. And yet, every evening I was exhausted, and to the point where I would actually get to the point in the evening where I'd look at this to-do list. I always had a to-do list, and I wouldn't be at the end. And I would just think, shit, I'm never going to get there. I am never never gonna get on top of this. And I just felt like I was drowning. Has anyone felt that experience of like, I just can't survive. I'm drowning in all of this. So yeah, I had my spiritual awakening. I didn't know it at the time. Like, if you'd have told me this was a spiritual awakening, I probably would have punched you in the face. It did not feel very spiritual, I can promise you that much. But looking back, I can see I got to the point where I couldn't take any more. And I had to change. I knew I had to change because I was miserable. I had everything society said I was supposed to have, and I was miserable. So I discovered over a long period of time how to become an empowered being. Now, what does this even look like? How do we recognize if we're starting to become an empowered being, or if we've actually already mastered some of this? And yeah, how can we recognize, like, do we still have more to go? Is there still a bit of growth for us? So some things that you can check in with yourself. And actually, I'll continue talking about it through my journey. I think that's probably the best way to articulate this. Is I started looking at my friendships primarily. When I say relationships, primarily I mean friendships. I started looking at my friendships and evaluating the balance of these friendships. Was I giving more than 50%? And were people continually disappointing me? And was I still staying in those relationships? And I really was. And it was a slow, painful process to recognize, wow, if I don't phone this person, if I don't message this person, they don't message me back. And I would wait months. I think I left it about 3 months, still nothing. I was like, wow. And then 6 months, and I was like, wow, it's been a whole 6 months. And without me initiating contact with these people or doing most of it, the legwork, these people were not reciprocating. And that was a massive red flag. That if any of you are in this situation where you notice that you are the primary driving force in a friendship or a family connection or a love relationship, that is a big red flag. That ultimately says that you don't value yourself and that the other person doesn't value you enough. Not to say they don't value you, because they probably do in their own way, but you're giving this relationship 110% and they're giving it about 40. So the balance has got to be equal. And that's not to say that it will always be equal. Of course, people go through traumatic situations in their life and balances do change. But overall, look at the overall balance of where you're at. And if you're always the one that's giving more, then you've got to look at, why are you staying in that relationship? So I got really honest with myself, really like, why am I staying? And I realized I had a lot of these people on a pedestal. They were like up here and I was down here. And I was like, oh, but if this person likes me, then I'm worth something. Then I mean something. Then I've got value of some sort. There were a whole bunch of people that I was hanging on to that I thought had some sort of superior social status to me. And so by me being associated with them in some way, I was like, oh, well, then that means I've got the same status they do. And I had to just let all that go. I looked at it and I was like, wow, that is not healthy. So I started to get clear on these relationships, and I just let go of the relationships that were not nourishing me, the ones that were not reciprocating, and the ones that were in some way dragging me down, like emotionally. I just stopped messaging them. I just stopped asking them to meet up, and they stopped too. There were a few that actually did want to keep meeting up with me, but I realized, you know what, those people, they might still want to have a relationship with me, but they've let me down so many times that I didn't trust them anymore. And I was sort of like staying in this friendship in almost like a state of tolerating, like I was tolerating the friendship rather than actually wanting to be in it. So that's another red flag. If you recognize that you're like just putting up with somebody, like, newsflash, that's not a friendship. That might be not be news for you, but for me, it was one of those flashing, neon light moments. So I let go of a lot of people, and I started to really work on my self-esteem and my self-love. So if you've been on a self-love or journey of recognizing your own personal value, drop me a message in the comments. And by the way, if anyone's got questions, please do ask them as we go along. Don't wait until the end. Just drop a question in as you have the questions come up, and I will happily answer them as part of this video. So I started having therapy. I started having counseling sessions, as I suspect many of my viewers, many of the people watching this will at least have contemplated counseling, if not actually have done possibly significant amounts of it. So I've done probably about 8 years in total of in sections of one-to-one therapy, plus lots of week-long retreats, lots of drop-in different workshops and things, and even now I continue to have one-to-one therapy, because as I grow, as I now start to teach this material and I'm building my business, I've now got also a beautiful man in my life and all of these things, I want someone to help me see the parts of myself I can't see by myself. So I'm good at seeing my shadow. I'm good at seeing the parts of me that are not functioning in a healthy way, but I can't always get to the root of the problem myself. So having a weekly therapist is really helpful. So through having weekly therapy, I really, really grew my self-love and my self-worth. I started to see places where I was not valuing myself, and even where I was really sacrificing myself for the love, approval of others, for the acceptance of others, really just, giving myself away. And I really started to embrace the parts of myself that were not perfect, were not so comfortable, and even the parts of myself I really didn't like. I mean, you sort of go through phases with this work, but I can now happily say even the parts of myself that I still look at and I'm like, ooh, that's a little rough around the edges, I can still embrace it and I can still hold it and go, yeah, that is a bit rough around the edges, and it's still part of who Natalie Ford is. There's the great parts of Natalie Ford, the loving parts, the open parts, there's the shy parts, there's the pained, the parts that are holding pain, and there's the angry parts, and there's all of these other parts, and all of that makes up who I am, and I wouldn't be me without all of those pieces. And one of the parodies of self-love is that we need to learn to be willing to accept all of who we are, even the bits that we would like to be different. We first of all have to get to a place of going, actually, yeah, this is part of who I am. I don't necessarily love this part. I don't necessarily want this part to remain how it always is for the rest of my life, but it is part of who I am, and I'm willing to accept it and go, yeah, that bit, that's still part of this. That's still part of me. Because from a place of acceptance, only then can we really authentically change something. Yeah, Claire, how can we really love the parts that we actually don't love so much? It's so true. And I think a lot of it comes down to this word love. So many of us have connotations around what love is and what love isn't. And we feel like, oh, I have to think so highly of all of me, and I have to think that, I'm this, I don't know, this angel with a halo and wings and I can't do anything wrong. It's like, no, love doesn't have to be all sunshine and rainbows. A lot of actually what I teach is shadow work. I'll talk a little bit more about shadow work after this piece. But shadow and I want to be clear, shadow is not bad, but shadow is the part of us that we've disowned, the part of us that actually we've gone, oh, that's not part of me. No, I don't do that. I never do that. No, that thing, that's what we call shadow. I put out a post today about projection. We can often see parts of our shadow when it's reflected back to us in another. So if you notice that somebody does something that irritates the shit out of you, that's what we call projection. And what it means is it's a part of your shadow that, it's a part of you that you've disowned. And yeah, how do we, in quotes, love these parts? And really the first step is to just accept that is part of who you are. Really replace the word love with acceptance, and it becomes so much more doable. Looking at how you feel about that behavior. So this is like, for me, the hardest part that I've needed to accept about myself is during my 20s, I was a very aggressive person. I had a lot of built up resentment and anger, like really to the point where I was like this ball of anger walking around. And if somebody happened to just knock me, some anger would literally like spew out of my mouth. That's how much built up anger and resentment I had, that you just had to look at me the wrong way and I was ready to kill you. And I was not a very nice person if people knocked into my anger bag. I had to work through a lot of accepting, shit, I did that. I said those things. I made people feel bad. I was a bully to some people. And yeah, I was a bully to myself primarily, but I was a bully to other people too. And yeah, I hurt people, and I wasn't a very nice person to be around when I was in that state. Other times I was delightful. But learning to look at that and say, well, okay, well, how did I get there? Why was I behaving that way? And the truth is, a whole load of stuff happened in my childhood that meant that I felt unseen and unheard, unvalued. I went through 2 years of really excruciating bullying, where I took on the messages that I was basically a piece of shit and that nobody would ever love me. And so I was carrying all of this unprocessed pain. And the idea that somebody would even look at me the wrong way and add to that pain was just way beyond my tolerance level, way beyond my capacity. So what I can now do is I don't feel good about how I behaved in those moments, but I can accept that was part of who I am. And I can say, that version of me, that Natalie 20 years ago, she was hurting. She was really hurting. She thought she was a piece of shit. She didn't think anybody valued her. She didn't value herself, for sure. And she was desperate to be loved and desperate to be wanted and desperate to be needed. And I was basically a walking pincushion of pain, constantly feeling like I was being stabbed by people, which it wasn't their intention, but it was just my experience. So I don't know if that helps, Claire. Let me know if there's more in that I can serve in some way. But learning to accept all of who we are. Like, I wouldn't be Natalie Ford at age 41 now if I hadn't have been Natalie Ford at age 20, and at age 30 and at all the ages in between. I am who I am now because of my experiences. And the reason that I'm so passionate about this work and I teach it is because of the experiences I've had. So I went from being a very disempowered person, like not valuing myself, not knowing my self-worth. And because of that, I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to articulate my needs. I didn't even know that I was allowed to have needs. I know that sounds like a really silly statement. Everyone's like, of course you're allowed to have needs. But I felt like if I had needs, people wouldn't love me or people wouldn't meet those needs. So it was safer not to have them or not to express them. Yeah, cool. And so I had to go through this big journey of reaching rock bottom, my spiritual awakening, and learning what isn't working in my life. And the first stage was self-love. So number one, let's call it self-acceptance. Like the sort of common phrase that is bandied around is self-love, but really what self-love actually means is self-acceptance. Sure, the parts of us that we feel delightful about, we might really love them, but really to encapsulate all of it, it's, can we actually just accept this is who I am, and this is, my life experience so far is what has created me. There's nothing that happened in my life that hasn't contributed to this part of me being who I am. So number one, self-love / self-acceptance. Number two, learning to, because from self-love, we can then value ourselves, to have boundaries, and to basically say no to the things which aren't working aren't working in our life. And so one of the boundaries is letting go of people who don't reciprocate friendships. That's actually, it doesn't have to be a big announcement. It can just be a very discreet letting go, but that's actually a boundary. Boundaries don't have to look like this. In fact, actually, boundaries generally don't look like this. Boundaries often are a gentle sort of like, this is my space. This is my boundary. If you're putting up a boundary with your fists and with a knife, you're actually coming from a wounded place in you rather than an empowered place in you. So the wounded place is the victim archetype. A lot of the work I work with looks at archetypes, and the victim archetype will set what it thinks is boundaries, but actually they're walls, they are blocks, and they tend to come down very fast or go up very fast. And that's okay. It's a stage that we go through. But what it ultimately says is, I don't trust myself to be powerful enough to actually do this. So I'm going to do it with every bit of force I've got, because I'm scared that that I'm not enough. I'm still scared I'm not enough. And I'm still scared that I can't really look after myself. So, yeah, Claire, exactly that. If you don't feel empowered, you're not actually stating a boundary. You might be attempting to state a boundary, but really what you're doing is putting up possibly like a feeble fence, or you're putting up like the iron wall, and neither of those are true boundaries. But we don't need to get caught up so much right now around like a true boundary versus a boundary when we're learning, because we've all got to go through the phases where we're learning to have boundaries. And of course, some of those will be slightly feeble fences, and some of those will be iron walls, until we learn how to create like this sort of flexible perimeter, which is more of a healthy boundary. Cool. Just checking the comments. Awesome. Okay. So self-acceptance, boundaries, and it doesn't matter. Don't criticize yourself if your boundaries are still in a place of maturing. That will take time, really. I think I remember something my beautiful mum said. She has a way of loving me that can sometimes be painful. Where I said something like, I'm sorry if that boundary came across a bit harsh, I'm still learning how to do them. And she's like, you've been learning to do them for a really long time, Natalie. And I was like, okay, yeah, okay, I'm still not there. I'm still not quite nailing it. But the truth is, they do take a long time to learn to go between like this sort of feeble fence versus this iron wall, and find this gracefulness in between where boundaries can actually be fluid. And if that's something that you want to work on, then like I can support you with one-to-one sessions around that. But once we've got our self-acceptance and our boundaries, we can then get better at articulating our needs. So as we start to know these parts of ourselves, we start to accept ourselves, and we start to get clear on what is and isn't okay for us, we can really start to articulate our needs. And it is actually completely empowering and completely allowed. If anyone out there needs permission to give yourself permission, then know that you are allowed to have needs, and you are allowed to state needs. And in fact, actually not doing so is a real disservice to the other person, because you're placing some sort of expectation on the other one to try and work out what your needs are. If you're not articulating and owning your own needs, you're placing an unhealthy expectation on the other person to be like a mind reader, or to somehow intuitively know what your needs are, which of course they're going to get them wrong, right? And then you're going to feel, oh, this person didn't meet my needs. Well, if they didn't meet your needs, you need to look at how clearly did you express your needs. So number 3, expressing and articulating our needs clearly. Let me just see what my 4th point was, which I've currently forgotten. Bear with me. Right. 4th point, values and standards, which really, these 3 middle ones, they're all actually super intertwined. Graceful, exactly, Claire. Yeah, graceful boundaries. So values and standards, when we can accept ourselves, and when we've got values, and when we've got boundaries, and when we start articulating our needs, we can start to really value who we are. And we can start, this is actually, I guess, what true self-love is. It's valuing us, knowing our worth, knowing how valuable we are to ourselves, to the world, to everybody. And one of the really common misperceptions in the word value, I need some water, bear with me, is the belief that we're only worth what somebody else will pay or value. And this is really something that is honed in when you're selling a service. And it's a lie. It's not true. So you may get somebody who earns £10,000 a year, and you may get somebody who earns £100,000 a year. Now, there's might be a service which they both desire. Now, that service might be, I don't know, £200, for example. The person who gets paid £10,000 a year may not value that service at £200 because it's relative to their own financial circumstances and actually their own self-worth in many ways. The person who's earning £100,000 might be more than happy to pay £200 for a service. They might be, that's actually pretty cheap. So can you see how value is based upon perspective? I'm using a service to demonstrate because it's easy when this is put in monetary terms. But if somebody chooses to value me because of who I am, because of who all of Natalie Ford is, that actually has no impact whatsoever on how valuable I actually am, because the other person will only value me based upon their own perspective. And they may, for whatever reason, have, again, I'm going to use this word projection, which is my latest definition post I put out earlier today. They may have either a positive or a negative projection on me. They may be looking at me through rose-tinted glasses and think that, you know, I'm the best thing in the world, and therefore they may have an extremely high value of me. Or I might trigger the crap out of them, and they might look at me in a very negative projection and be like, oh, that Natalie Ford, no, don't trust anything she says, she's worthless. But if I'm choosing to allow my value to be dictated by others, can you see how much it fluctuates? Like one person wants me up here and the other person wants me down here, rather. So if we allow our value, our self-worth to be dictated by others, we're constantly going to be in this really volatile space of like, well, hang on, that person said this and this person said this one criticized me, this one praised me. And it's like being on a small boat in the middle of a rocky ocean. It's a really unstable, uncomfortable place to be. So we have to understand that our value is determined by us and us only. My value is purely determined by how much I think of me. And somewhat paradoxically, this will also get reflected out into the world. If I declare that to have a private 1-hour session with me costs £1,000, a lot of people might look at that and go, oh no, I can't value that. But then there's also a lot of people on a different price scale that will look at that and go, yeah, that's fine. I can afford that. Now, the paradox is that if I choose to value myself at £10 for an hour, then some people might look at that and go, oh, well, she's obviously not very good, is she? She's just £10 an hour. It's like, well, that's not really worth very much. So how much I choose to value myself also gives a message to the world about my worth. So let me know if any of this is making sense and resonating. And if you've got any questions, please just drop them in the chat. So we've got self-acceptance, boundaries, stating your needs, and then we've got actually valuing ourselves. Because when we value ourselves, we can start to have standards. We can start to actually say, do you know what? I'm not willing to tolerate this behavior in another person. And that we don't have to, again, this is not like one of these boundaries that comes down like an iron wall. It can be very much dependent on a circumstance or dependent on how the person's energy is or what it is, but there might be certain standards that we have. For example, like when I'm looking for a partner, I know that there are certain standards that I want in my partner that I'm not willing to date below. And I'm not talking financial standards or anything like that. I'm talking about how much self-development has somebody done? How self-aware are they? What sort of language do they use? How in touch are they with their emotions? What sort of how do they manage difficult situations and conflict? All of those things for me are standards. When I start dating somebody, and even actually with friends, I have standards for what I will and won't accept in a friendship and a love relationship. And I also have those standards in my family relationships as well, which, goodness me, I think we all probably know that family relationships are the hardest ones. But even then, it takes longer and it's more complicated to change these dynamics. But I've now, implemented standards with people in my family where if they, hang on, nearly accidentally ended the live video there. If they start to talk to me with a certain energy, I will just say, that's not helpful for this situation. I'm not willing to accept this right now. Let's take a pause. Let's, take some time out and let's come back when we're in a different space, something like that. So when I talk about standards, really standards and boundaries are very intertwined. They don't have to be, in fact, we don't want them to be iron walls. We do want them to be flexible and to be movable depending on circumstances and situations. But when we really start to value ourselves, we can actually really start to uphold these standards, because when we hold a standard, we have to accept that not everybody's going to meet it. That is like the definition of a standard. Not everybody is going to meet the standard. And so we have to be willing to sacrifice those that don't meet the standard. Or it may not necessarily be people. It may be clients. It may be circumstances. It may be going to social events. So we have to be willing to say, if I'm going to uphold my standards, there are some things that I'm going to say no to. Some things I'm going to miss out on. Some people I'm going to miss out on. Some clients I'm going to miss out on. But I value myself enough that I'm willing to sacrifice those things because they don't meet my standards. So let me know in the chat how this is sitting for you. Just looking at the message from Claire. How would you deal with the parts of you that don't like the fact that you have to love yourself first? So Claire, I'm just going to check in. Would these be parts of you that would like to push away and disown the parts that you're struggling to love? Would that, are they the same parts that don't like the fact that they need to work towards self-acceptance? Let me know if I've got that right. I'm just going to tune into what my next point is while I'm just waiting for Claire to come back to me on that. When we've got these 4 points already, we've got the self-acceptance, the boundaries, the needs, the values and standards, and these things don't necessarily come in a linear order. We start working on sort of all of them. It's just when you've got number one really rooted, you're in a much more empowered place to do number two. When you've got two rooted, you're in a more empowered place to do 3 and 4, etc. But there's nothing to stop you working on all of these in parallel, like simultaneously. And the next stage, once we've got the self-acceptance, the boundaries, the needs, the valuing and the standards, is we can really move into a place of empowerment, like really step into a place of ease with others, because this number 4 is critical. Being able to value ourselves enough that we are willing to sacrifice whatever doesn't meet our standards. This then means that we can relate to people from a place of not fearing that we might lose them. Of course, there'll always be a part of us that, particularly if we care about somebody, we might not want to lose them. But if we really, truly value ourselves, then we will recognize where our standards are. And if somebody in our life just for whatever reason keeps breaching our boundaries, or isn't able to meet our standards, or doesn't value us, or isn't able to meet our needs, then the right thing to do is to walk away. The right thing to do is to say, I've really loved our time together. I've really loved what we've shared, if that's true for you. And I feel like we've come to completion. I feel like we've journeyed as far as we can, or I feel like, maybe our paths are digressing. We're no longer in alignment. Whatever. I'm not really here to talk about conscious endings today, although that is part of the work that I teach. But to recognize that when we truly deeply value ourselves, we are okay to let go of what no longer serves our highest good. And this really is true empowerment, because you are no longer afraid to express all of who you are. You are no longer looking to compromise yourself, your self-expression, your standards, your values. You're not willing to compromise that, because you are okay to sacrifice people who don't agree with you or don't want to be around you. So let me just come back to the message that Claire answered. Right. So Claire, you're talking about the parts of you that okay, I think you're talking about the parts of you that maybe are so depleted from self-love already that they don't have enough love to love the other parts of you. I think that's what you mean. And I would start by just topping up the parts of you that you can love. There may be a narrative running, maybe an inner critic part of you running that is telling you that unless you can love all of you, you're not good enough. Unless you can embrace every single part of you, that you're doing it wrong. And that's the bit where that's the lie. That's the bit you've got to cut out and say, no, I'm doing the best I can. And we're all works in progress. It doesn't matter how long we've been on this journey. We are all works in progress. And there will always be parts of us that we are, still developing, still learning to embrace, still learning to love. So the way that we can really top up our self-love is to start upholding our values and our standards. Because every time we don't uphold our values and our standards, we give ourselves the message that we aren't worth upholding those values and standards for. So whilst that might be number 4 on my list, it's also paradoxically the thing that starts feeding the other things. So to really reach this 5th point where you feel completely empowered to create empowered relationships with others, where you can state your boundaries, state your needs and your desires. So let me just be clear that needs and desires are very much come together. You might want to express some dreams or some intimate desires or something with somebody, and those come as part of being able to speak about your needs. So boundaries create a container for us which set the stage for us to feel comfortable to bring our more delicate parts. So we can set up some boundaries with people to bring forward our needs and desires that feel like they might need a bit more holding than maybe is available just off the shelf. But yeah, you might want to start expressing your dreams, your deepest hopes and desires, your sexual desires, whatever they might be. These are all parts of needs, desires, and they all come together with boundaries and valuing yourself enough to speak your truth fully. When we're also in a place of empowerment, we take responsibility for all of ourselves. This is another post I put out this morning about self-responsibility, about recognizing that other people are not responsible for our happiness. Our well-being is an inside job. And when we can really start to own that, then we argue less with our partners. We fight less about the small details about who did or didn't do something, or about whether or not needs are being met, because we recognize that we're responsible for our own well-being. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to meet every single need yourself. You don't, but you have to take responsibility for that need getting met. Now, you can choose to meet that need yourself, or you can ask somebody else to help you with that, or directly farm it out and say, this is a need I can't meet myself. Are you willing to do that for me? So taking responsibility for your needs is not the same as meeting your needs. I want to be really clear with that. That stepping into empowerment is very much about recognizing that the only person who's going to make me happy is me. The only person that's going to create magical relationships is me, because I'm going to bring that part of myself into the relationship, and I'm going to articulate my needs and my desires. I'm going to stand up for myself by protecting my boundaries. I'm going to know already what my values and my standards are, so I can recognize if this person is a good match to be a friend with me or a good match to be a lover with me. And from this place, you can have really open, honest, authentic conversations, which really is the juice of empowered relating. So fast forward on my personal story, I'm now at the point where maybe a good example is the person I'm currently seeing, that things, the first few weeks connecting were amazing with this person. It was really clear that they met my standards. They valued me. I valued them. They felt like a really good match. I went into this relationship really, really clear what my dating standards were. And this person literally was checking off box after box after box. And then we hit some territory which we hadn't anticipated, where it turns out some of my values actually go quite against some of his values. And it became a real point where we're still in this discussion of, can we find a way forward? Now, the difference from how a disempowered person versus an empowered person might connect in this way, or should we say a disempowered relationship versus an empowered relationship, a disempowered relationship might look like lots of anger getting thrown around, lots of blame, lots of shame. You should do this. Well, I need this. Well, lots of demanding. Or alternatively, just cutting that person off and being like, right, fine, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm done. It's not going to work. Both of those are the disempowered end of the spectrum, because we aren't fully articulating our needs. We aren't holding healthy boundaries. All of these are quite wound-inflicted boundaries. And we're not really taking full responsibility for our well-being. Darius, I'll come to your question in just a moment. The empowered way of working through a relationship in this way is to say, okay, well, these are my values, needs, and standards and boundaries. What are yours? And then, okay, where are we overlapping? Where actually is there place where we do meet, and where are the places where we're polarized? It's like, okay, right, we meet a lot of these places, but I see here and here we're polarized. So, what does this mean to you, and what does this mean to me? And we start looking at, okay, I'm hearing that you've got this value or standard. What does it mean to you, or what does it look like in the real world? Or what would you need from me in order to feel met in that? And then likewise on the other direction, having the same conversation likewise. And we're starting to see that even though these two things look really, really polarized on the surface, when we actually start to unpick them, we're actually talking quite a similar language. It just looks very, very polarized on the surface of things. So we could have gone down the route of blaming, shaming, cutting the other person off, making the other person wrong, slamming the door, whatever it might be. And of course, there might be moments where those things come up because we're human and we may not have fully got to the place where we've got complete mastery over our emotions and energy just yet. But can we open the door again and can we say, hey, do you know what? I think I reacted a little too harsh there, or I reacted too fast, or my defenses came up, or do you know what? I said that, and actually what I really meant was this. I want to find a way forward with you. How can we do this? Let's understand more about what your needs are, what your standards are, and what mine are. And if there's common ground, great, let's find that. But if there really isn't, then let's leave with love and respect and say, you're a beautiful being, I'm a beautiful being, and let's part in a really harmonious, loving way. So let me just come to the questions. Yeah, so Darius, why is it not our responsibility to meet every need we have? So this is a common pitfall with a lot of, what would I call them? Spiritual circles or self-love circles or enlightenment circles, that to be an empowered being, you have to meet every single need that you've ever had, and you have to be so completely self-sufficient that you never need anybody ever. This actually is a trauma response. To be so incredibly self-sufficient that we don't need anybody and we can survive completely self-sufficiently is actually the avoidant attachment, and it's a trauma response where having our what's that word I'm seeking? Needing to rely on another in some way, and therefore trusting another, and therefore being vulnerable, has become so incredibly risky and so, in quotes, unsafe, that it's got totally polarized to the other end of the spectrum. And what a truly empowered being knows is that they can meet their own needs if they can't find an alternative solution, or that they will do absolutely everything they can to find a solution to have their needs met. So it's about the taking responsibility to ensure that the needs get met, and to look at the big picture and to say, am I doing this in the way which is most in alignment with my integrity, most in alignment with who I am? So Darius, let me know if that helps. Stating needs can be scary and painful. Yeah, because we're showing vulnerability. Absolutely, Claire. Right. So how do I get better at knowing what my needs are in a relationship? One of the best ways is to recognize when your needs are not being met. Recognize when it hurts. Typically, if we're experiencing pain, it's because a need is not being met. So every time we're experiencing pain, look at that as an opportunity to dig below the surface and recognize, okay, is there a boundary that I didn't state, or is there a need that I didn't articulate that's not being met? So that's the way we dig down. It's also something I support people with. I guess at this point in time, I probably should mention, I have a self-paced, self-study online training called Talking Truths, in which everything I've covered and so much more is broken down into digestible segments with steps as to how can you do all of this for yourself. Basically, how can you take the journey from disempowerment to empowerment, and how can you create the relationships that you want in your life, starting with yourself and bringing this out to your friends, your family, your loved ones. How can you create the most amazing relationships that I know if you're watching this video, then you really deeply desire to be met in relationship in a way where you are seen and heard and valued, You can articulate your needs, you can state your boundaries, and to be met likewise with somebody who can do the same, so that you don't have to caretake them, you don't have to be responsible for another person being like, that's their responsibility. So I also talk a lot about this in Talking Truths. About, I've got a whole module called where do I end and the other begins. You know, it's all about recognizing what is my responsibility and what is the other's responsibility. So if you set the bar too low, Claire, there's a chance that you, or it's not really a chance, it's probably highly likely that you don't think you're worth setting the bar higher. So there's some self-esteem work there. Yeah, chronic independence, exactly. That extreme independence of, I don't need anybody, I'm so self-sufficient. And don't get me wrong, like everything's a bit of a pendulum, you know, everything comes in a spectrum. So if you've been on a very dependent part of your journey, you might swing to hyper independence in order to work out where the middle is. Please do not criticize yourself for doing this. Hands up, I've totally been there. Everything is really a pendulum, and we can't know where the middle is if we haven't worked out where the ends are. So never, ever criticize yourself for being polarized at one end or the other of a spectrum, because you're just working out how long the piece of string is so that you can find where the middle is, right? So, so Darius is asking, are people really happy to meet needs that you're not willing to meet yourself? That's a negotiation to be had. That's a question. It really depends on depends a lot on the energy of what you're asking. I'm going to make this the last thing I say, because we're running a little bit out of time, a little bit behind schedule. If I come to you and I say, Darius, I've got this thing, it's so heavy and I just can't carry it. Well, can you be completely responsible for it, please? Chances are you're going to look at me and go, well, hang on. If you can't carry it, what makes you think I want to? So that's one place where, if you're trying to give somebody complete responsibility for meeting your needs or your happiness, they're probably going to go, ooh, no. But if I say, Darius, I've got this need, I'm doing everything I can to meet it myself. Like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and there's more. Would you be willing to help me in these ways? And you can articulate what those ways are. Would you be willing to do X, Y, and Z, because it would really help me hold this? Now, you might be much more receptive to that. Do you feel the difference energetically? One is basically me going, I've got a hot potato and I don't want to hold it. Do you want to hold it? And the other one is going, I've got this part of me that I really love and I really care about, and its needs are too great for me to meet by myself. Would you be willing to look at that with me? Is that a conversation we could have? The difference also is that if that person says no, you're not crushed and you're not like heartbroken. Oh my God, I was so rejected. It's like, okay, well, that's not a viable avenue for me to meet the full needs of this part of me. So what are my other options? You know, maybe there's an avenue over here. Maybe there's another avenue over there. So it's really this warrior archetype that is willing to do whatever it will take to ensure that that our inner world is looked after. I'm happy that makes sense. So if you have loved everything in this video, and if you recognize that you are on a journey of self-empowerment, please go to my Talking Truths page, check it out. I'm also available for having one-to-one calls today and tomorrow. I'm going to put the link in the chat here. If you are considering Talking Truths and you feel like, you know, is this the right training for me? Isn't it? I'm not quite sure. Private message me, let's book a call, and yeah, let's have a discussion if this is the right training for you. And if not, then we can see what other avenues might be there. And if you are not already on my mailing list, then I'm also going to stick a link in there to join my mailing list so that you can stay up to date on Talking Truths and other trainings. It has been an absolute joy sharing with you my deep passion around empowered relating. Please feel free to reach out to me for any questions. Yeah, I'm basically available the rest of today and tomorrow, and I really look forward to hearing from you. Thanks to those who signed on, and I'm going to end the video now.